Thousands of people have taken part in anti-racism protests across the UK.
11 cities disrupted. 19 major roads shut down. Over 1,200 officers redeployed nationwide. An estimated £27 million in economic damage, all within a single day. Britain has just experienced its most widespread wave of anti-racism protests in over a decade, and the scale caught even senior police commanders off guard. What began as planned demonstrations quickly grew into something far larger, far tenser, and far more unpredictable. Crowds surged across Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Glasgow, Cardiff, and central London, overwhelming local authorities and forcing emergency teams to divert resources from routine operations. Multiple regions reported capacity strain, and several forces privately confirmed they were operating at their lowest resilience levels since 2011. Shops shuttered early, transport systems stalled. City centers ground to a halt as tens of thousands filled public squares demanding justice, reform, and accountability, while smaller, more volatile groups splintered off, escalating tensions and triggering standoffs with police. And yet, as chaotic as today looked, officials across the country are warning that this may only be the beginning. Not because of the protests themselves, but because of what they reveal. A nation struggling with deep mistrust, fraying social cohesion, and political leadership unable to calm or even contain the moment. If you value straightforward reporting on moments like this, do take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Simple as that. Today, we'll examine how a single spark ignited nationwide unrest, why police forces are warning of structural strain, and why many across the UK fear this is not the end, but the opening chapter of a larger confrontation brewing beneath the surface.
What unfolded today didn't come out of nowhere. It was the collision point of three forces Britain has spent years refusing to confront: the erosion of public trust, the rise of migration-linked tensions, and communities who feel both unheard and unprotected. The anti-racism protests were the spark, but the fuel had been piling up for months. Police sources describe today as a perfect storm, beginning shortly after noon when demonstrations in Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool suddenly swelled beyond anticipated attendance. Organizers expected a combined turnout of 18,000. The reality? Closer to 60,000, a number that sent control rooms across the country scrambling. By early afternoon, major arteries through city centers began choking under the surge. Oxford Street shut down within 7 minutes. Manchester's Deansgate gridlocked. Glasgow police declared a dynamic deployment shift, code for "we're no longer in control of the logistics." The protests themselves centered on anger toward structural discrimination, policing disparities, and the treatment of racial minorities, grievances that have existed for years. Chants demanding justice echoed through nearly every city, accompanied by placards condemning systemic inequality. But layered beneath the anti-racism message was another current, one political leaders have tried and failed to keep separate from the conversation: frustration over illegal migration and asylum-related tensions. Whether fair or not, many communities see the two debates merging, especially in areas where public housing lists have ballooned, schools are oversubscribed, GP wait times have doubled, and local services are stretched beyond their breaking point. This is not to say today's protesters were motivated by migration. Most were not. But public frustration, already at a boiling point, made the atmosphere combustible. In Birmingham, a crowd defending a community center clashed with a countergroup accusing local officials of favoring newcomers over residents. In Leeds, a march that began peacefully erupted after rumors spread online that a far-right group was approaching, which police later confirmed was false. These moments didn't define the protests, but they revealed how thin the social fabric has become, how quickly misinformation can weaponize fear, and how migration anxieties now sit just beneath the surface of almost every national debate. Officers today describe the atmosphere in identical words: volatile uncertainty. Not because every marcher was angry, but because Britain itself feels divided into two incompatible realities. One Britain sees a fight for justice. The other sees the collapse of order. And caught between them are communities struggling to coexist under systems that no longer seem built for the population they serve. Today wasn't just a protest, it was a pressure gauge, and it hit the red zone. For hours, senior officials insisted the situation was manageable. But internally, policing units across the country were sounding the alarm. A leaked regional coordination memo described the day bluntly: "We are operating at functional minimums. Any additional civil disorder may exceed capacity." Translated, if one more city had erupted, Britain would not have had enough officers to respond. What police will not say in public, but admit privately, is that anti-racism protests are no longer the sole issue. They sit at the intersection of race, community identity, migration pressures, and political vacuum, creating flashpoints that stretch officers far beyond traditional crowd control models. Here's what today revealed. First, the front line is overwhelmed. Officers reported being redeployed 3 times within the same hour. London alone reassigned 480 officers, leaving other districts exposed. A sergeant in Manchester put it simply: "We're not reacting to violence, we're reacting to volume." Second, illegal migration tensions are amplifying every protest. In multiple cities, countergroups appeared not to oppose anti-racism messaging, but to express anger at immigration policies. Some carried signs reading, "British families left behind," "Fix the borders first," "Services collapsing, but they ignore us." Police confirmed that several confrontations today began between local residents and pro-refugee activist groups, not between protesters and the police. Third, officers are angry at the government. Many feel they have become the shock absorbers of national failure. Rising population pressures, strained integration systems, budget cuts, and a political class that refuses to acknowledge the link between community tension and uncontrolled migration flows. One inspector told us off-record, "We are expected to police problems the government won't even name." Fourth, misinformation turned minutes into chaos. In Cardiff, a rumor spread that a mosque was under attack. False. In Birmingham, a rumor claimed an asylum center was being targeted. Also false, but the rumors drew hundreds toward the same areas, overwhelming containment teams. Fifth, officers fear the next phase: escalation from outside groups. Far-right agitators were cited in 4 cities. Far-left groups attempted to hijack marches in Manchester and Bristol. Both attempted to weaponize anti-racism messaging for their own agendas. Police intelligence units privately warn that Britain is entering an era of movement-against-movement protest cycles, meaning today was not the peak. It was the beginning of a wider national reshaping of identity politics. And officers know they are under-equipped for it. The phrase repeated in every leaked briefing was the same: not sustainable. Not the protests, not the staffing levels, not the political silence surrounding migration pressures intensifying community fractures. Today showed the public the streets. Police saw the bigger picture, a nation straining under unresolved tensions, with officers stuck in the middle. Every major protest reveals more about the country than its slogans. And today, Britain revealed 3 fault lines that will define the next decade. Fault line 1. Communities living in different realities. For many who marched today, the message was moral and urgent. End discrimination, demand justice, reform policing. But for thousands of others watching from behind shuttered shop windows, the day represented something different: fear of instability, frustration at overwhelmed local services, and anger that political leaders seem more responsive to protests than to struggling residents. In cities with high asylum housing numbers, tensions rose fastest, not because protesters were dangerous, but because communities already feel stretched thin. People see housing lists years long, GP surgeries full, schools at capacity, neighborhood demographics shifting faster than local integration can manage. When anti-racism marches arrive in these areas, they collide with anger that predates the protests themselves. Fault line 2, a political class afraid to speak plainly. Across Westminster, statements tonight were predictable. We support peaceful protest. We condemn violence. We stand for unity. But not one senior figure addressed the underlying pressure that communities feel, the pace and scale of migration into already fragile cities. By trying to separate anti-racism discourse from migration realities, leaders end up satisfying no one. Supporters of the marches feel dismissed, opponents feel ignored, and the police are left to absorb the fallout. When government refuses to name the tensions shaping a protest, those tensions surface anyway, in the streets. Fault line 3. The collapse of trust. The loudest message today wasn't in chants. It was in conversations. People no longer trust police to protect them, media to tell the full story, or government to stabilize the country. Trust doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes, quietly, until one day people realize they don't believe anything coming from official channels. Today was that day for many. Britain now faces a deeper question. Can a nation stay cohesive when its institutions lose legitimacy on both sides of the divide? The answer will shape the next protest and the next crisis, because once trust fractures, it rarely heals cleanly. Today was not just about racial justice, not just about migration pressure, not just about policing. It was about a society where every group believes the system is failing them. And they're all right. Tonight, as the crowds disperse and the sirens fade into the background, Britain is left with a question far heavier than anything seen on the streets today. What exactly did this moment reveal about who we are and who we are becoming? Because the truth is this: today's anti-racism protests were not simply about injustice or policing or one tragic incident. They were about a deeper fracture. A slow-burning tension woven through years of mistrust, demographic shifts, cultural clashes, and a political system that appears increasingly incapable of absorbing the pressure. Every city told a different story, but the pattern was unmistakable. In Manchester, families marched for fairness, but ended the night boarding up shop fronts. In Birmingham, a peaceful rally turned into a standoff within minutes because one rumor online pulled hundreds in the wrong direction. In Leeds, rival groups showed up completely unannounced, something police commanders privately admitted was their worst-case scenario. In London, a march meant to honor victims of discrimination morphed into 3 simultaneous crowd surges that pushed the entire city to its limit. And beneath it all lay the same silent truth. No one trusts the system to manage these moments anymore. Not the communities who feel unheard, not the police who feel outnumbered, not the councils who feel unprepared, not even the national government, which now speaks in rehearsed lines rather than real solutions. Britain today did not just witness unrest, Britain witnessed a stress test of its social foundation. And the foundation shook. Because once you strip away the slogans, the banners, and the politics, what remains is a society caught between 2 realities. Reality 1, millions demanding equality, dignity, and an end to discrimination. Values any functioning democracy should aspire to uphold. Reality 2, a growing fear that protests, no matter how they begin, are increasingly hijacked by groups with agendas far beyond racial justice. Activists seeking confrontation, networks linked to extremist provocateurs, and yes, even migrant-linked factions who see public chaos as an opportunity to project influence. This duality is what makes today's events so volatile. The line between movement and mayhem is thinner than ever, and every time the system hesitates, the line dissolves. Police leaders admitted off-record that they were one major spark away from losing control in at least 2 cities today. Councils described the atmosphere as emotionally flammable. Community leaders begged for calm while simultaneously warning that they cannot guarantee tomorrow will look like today. That is not stability. That is a warning shot. And here's the part nobody in Westminster wants to acknowledge. If trust continues to erode at this speed, Britain will not be debating how to manage protests. Britain will be debating how to prevent the next national confrontation. Because tonight, the country did not just march. It revealed its fracture lines: racial, economic, cultural, generational. Lines that have been widening for years. And unless someone steps forward with the courage to confront these tensions honestly, not with slogans, not with platitudes, not with temporary policing plans, then what happened today will repeat, bigger, faster, harder to contain. So now, before we close, I want to hear from you, the people watching this, who see the streets from the ground level, not from a minister's briefing note. Were today's anti-racism protests a justified outcry or a sign of dangerous social unraveling? Comment justice or unrest. And tell me why, because whatever this day becomes in the history books, a turning point, a warning, or the start of something far larger, one thing is certain: Britain cannot pretend it didn't see the signs. Tonight, the country looked in the mirror. What it saw should concern every one of us.